Welcome to the Rhode Island Right to Bear Arms Network, a show dedicated to gun rights in the state of Rhode Island.
Hi folks, welcome back to the Rhode Island Right to Bear Arms Network. My name is Glenn Valentine. I'm the Vice President of the Rhode Island Firearms League. You can check us out on Facebook, and you can also head to our webpage. It's rifol.org. There's lots of information about some of the things that are happening in the state that I'm going to cover in this podcast, but just check that out. Also, make sure that you get on our text messaging service. It's by texting RI Gun Rights to 88202, all one word. And if you actually head to our webpage and you go up to the corner on the far left-hand side at the top, you'll see there it says SMS. If you type that, we'll also snag your email address as well. Again, you may not want to share your personal information, but it is important that we have a way to get in touch with you. I still see folks out there asking, saying like, how do I get information? Or, we need to get more organized. We have things in place. So just make sure you take advantage of those things and share those as well. Share them with folks in your gun shops, some of your friends that you shoot with, or your family members, or also share them on the pages for the various gun clubs across the state. Because it's hard for us to kind of follow those and share some things. I know I share things to the Beagle Club. I see a few clubs out there on social media, but I don't, hit them all, and I'm not always familiar with all the clubs. So just make sure you share it to whatever pages you think are folks that would want to, get some of the information that we send out. Now, as far as today's podcast, I'm going to talk about the hearings that took place this week and then the ones we anticipate are going to happen very soon. And you've been hearing us talk about the bills being submitted and how COVID-19 has created this crazy sort of interaction dynamic between us and legislators and what we can and can't do. And this idea that there's a small minority of folks in the General Assembly that are absolutely exploiting this to ram this legislation through. So we've talked about this in the past. We think it's getting close. We know that there's going to be hearings very soon. We will announce those as soon as we hear. But this past week, we had some hearings. And I'll get into what some of the things that you need to do in order to prepare for that, the process to sign up to testify, and what that's going to look like. But we got a little taste of it this week when we saw two bills actually on the House side where there were two Castle Doctrine related bills that would have expanded the Castle Doctrine. What you should know is that essentially you have no duty to retreat in your home if there was an intruder, as you shouldn't. And in some states like Massachusetts, for instance, if you have a means to escape from your home, if there was no one else in the house, you would be required by law to at least make an attempt to escape. And there may be a case law that says otherwise in Massachusetts, but I know in Rhode Island at one point we did have a duty to retreat case law. There's 3 cases that come to mind, which maybe we'll talk about in a future podcast. But there are certainly there's protections for folks. So there were post-law litigation or post-case law that you didn't have their duty to retreat anymore. And so the General Assembly responded in Chapter 8, where now we have a Castle Doctrine where you are protected. And there's case law that actually expands that beyond the home, not just to your domicile, but to other places. So we do have a kind of expanded Castle Doctrine in this state, but this would have made it essentially you would not be required to retreat by law in any situation where you were in a place where you were legally able to be. Now, that's not to say you don't have the right to defend yourself outside the home, but the circumstances dictate that you behave differently than if it were, in fact, in your home. So regardless, those you can search those bills online on the State House website, and you can check out some of the testimony if you go on RI Capital TV. Anyway, so some of the things that stood out in that hearing were the process in which people signed up to testify and then how that rolled out later in the evening. So the current process they have, and I think that in the past, we've gone to the State House, you sign up to testify, you're in support or in opposition to certain bills, and sometimes it's not exactly clear because they put everything on one form, and so you check off the box that says opposed, but you might be writing bill numbers down for bills like those Castle Doctrine bills, and all of a sudden now you've got to sign up in support of those, but the form only allows you to do one or the other. And that's what we see with these forms online now. So currently, in order to testify, and we expect hearings hearings like very, very soon. There's two sort of avenues you can go with. One is you can submit written testimony via an email address, and that they provide you to the committee, committee's clerk. And you essentially state what your testimony is and what you state your position on the bills. And you need to make that very clear when you do that. And we're developing a system that's going to make this easier, not bulletproof easy, but easier for you. And you'll see that when we get word that the hearings are actually out there, because we don't want anyone filling anything out prior to this. God forbid you fill out the wrong form and your testimony goes where it shouldn't go. So because we want you to be counted. And so that email address is not the most efficient way for them to tally up who supports or is in opposition to certain bills. It also creates a difficulty when ideally you want to send one email that says that here's my testimony in opposition to this bill, and this bill, but I may support another bill. It's not likely to be read. So what's going to probably happen is folks are going to have to submit their opposition to one bill or two bills or three, and then their support of other bills in a different email, because it probably won't get tallied if it requires someone to read it. And that's just the nature of the way things are. If you do want to testify, which we highly, highly recommend that people do this, because the anti-gunners will astroturf their movement, where they get folks from probably all over the country in these different Moms Demand Action chapters across these cells of Moms Demand Action. They will testify remotely from wherever. And they may boost their numbers, make themselves look more inflated than what they are, but we know from the State House we turn out in thousands, and they turn out maybe 3 dozen folks. So we need to have people to sign up to testify, and that form is much more, I guess, it makes more sense. It's sort of like a Google form, and you check off whether you support or in opposition to that particular bill. You provide the bill number, and that's that. You give your name and your phone number, and then they call you, and then you go. They'll call your phone at some point during the night, and then you will testify via the phone. Now, the problem that presents really two things. One is that you need to submit a form for every single bill, and you may get called multiple times, which is not a problem. That's certainly, it's better than being limited, I guess, to a minute or 2 minutes to testify on all the bills. But it does create an inconvenience for folks that don't want to stay up until 10, 11 o'clock at night. But again, these are your civil rights, and so we can't sit there and say, you're gonna take our guns from our cold dead hands, but then say you're not willing to stay up until 11 o'clock at night and take a phone call and testify on a bill. So the other issue there is that we had a lot of folks that signed up to testify, and then when they had called, it was late at night, admittedly, and so a lot of folks just didn't take the call. They didn't recognize the number, didn't answer it. So out of 119 or so folks that signed up to testify, there was about a dozen that actually followed through with that. And so I get the nature of the bills. I had a conversation with a couple of legislators and just kind of explained to them that maybe folks weren't comfortable testifying full blown on a bill about castle doctrine and self-defense. I think they understand conceptually what it means, but maybe not comfortable testifying. I think that maybe that's why folks didn't follow through with the testifying, which I understand that, but we can't allow 4,000 people to sign up to testify and have 100 come to big hearings. And there will be hearings where we have the assault weapons ban, the magazine restriction, elimination of concealed carry. And we'll put links to these bills and summaries of what they do and don't do. But I think that folks are familiar enough with what these bills do, because we have been submitted on a perennial basis for the last 10 years, that most people will feel very comfortable testifying against these bills. So I don't think we'll have an issue with people signing up and not following through. But just make sure, if you're encouraging people to do this, just make sure that they understand that they can at least call in and in 2 or 3 sentences explain whether they support or do not support certain initiatives. And really, we don't want to leave legislators with the impression that we don't care. We've been sending emails, and we've gotten some legislators that have acknowledged the fact that they're getting bombarded with these things. But the other side is doing it as well, and they're doing it in ways that I think are sort of sneaky, in a sense that they're having everybody email every legislator, and that's not really productive, because they have no idea whether these people are constituents. We've targeted our folks at we've taken constituents, gun owners, and we've had them target their legislators. So it is more genuine on our side. It's more effective if they do in fact know that you are a constituent. So we need to just show them, like we did with the emails and phone calls, that we actually care about these bills. Don't throw your arms up in the air and say, oh, it's a done deal, they're all Democrats, they're just going to ram it through. That's not the case. We've been putting a lot of pressure on them, and we're making headway with a lot of legislators that were not, I guess, didn't understand what's in some of these bills. And yeah, I get it. They shouldn't sponsor or co-sponsor bills that they don't understand, but often they sponsor and co-sponsor bills they don't think will go anywhere. And in the case of an assault weapons ban, 99% of the legislators I've spoken with have no idea what these things even do. And so when you explain that it's most firearms, it's all magazines, they change their tune rather quickly. So when those hearings are actually announced, we'll make another podcast kind of giving the rundown in terms of what you need to do and where you need to go to make sure you are counted as in opposition to, and then also allowed to go in and fill out the form to testify. And so that will happen as soon as we know when this hearing date will be. But absolutely do not give up on spreading the word. And I know I've gotten emails this past week. I sent out quite a few emails just targeting at certain districts of legislators that we think are on the fence. And the reception has been very good in terms of those legislators telling those constituents that they're not going to support these initiatives. So we need to continue to do that and not let our guard down. But as far as those hearings go, so the hearings took place on Tuesday, and they were entirely virtual, and there was a number of bills, I want to say maybe 7, 8, 9 bills that night, which weren't all gun-related Actually, and there were no gun-related bills. It was 2 self-defense bills. But of the other bills that were on in front of the committee that night, there was one bill in particular that was seeking to reduce the penalties for, I guess, 10 milligrams or less of certain controlled substances, or maybe all control. I didn't watch all the details or listen to all the details, but it basically to decriminalize, not decriminalize, but reduce the sentence to a misdemeanor for many of these offenses that are currently felonies. And so if you had gotten caught, and I'm not a big drug person, so I don't know the details, but one of the representatives, Representative Neronha, who's a former police officer, mentioned fentanyl, and so I'll just use that as an example. I don't know whether the bill is or isn't, doesn't include that, but you would essentially be able to possess less than 10 milligrams or less, and it would not be a felony. And so it's the Attorney General's bill. And so the Attorney General testified for quite a while on this bill. I mean, and his defense for I guess pushing this bill, or not defense, but the narrative surrounding why he thought this was a good bill was essentially that folks that get convicted of possession of a small amount of drugs like this, let's say 5 milligrams of something, it's considered a felony possession of a controlled substance, and those penalties apparently, again, I'm not an expert on this, but it's apparently a felony to be in possession of, for instance, 5 milligrams of whatever the substance, let's just say it's fentanyl. And so the Attorney General just explained that these felonies are, part of the process, and it's not a bad thing, but part of the process is essentially that, there are plea deals that are given to some of these folks that are convicted of these things or that are charged with these things. And if they plead to a certain charge, then they'll never see jail time. And so ultimately, in his words, or I'm paraphrasing his words, but ultimately it turns into just a probation. So you're put on probation for this felony conviction, or a felony, and so you serve no prison time, but essentially it marks your record to where now there are heavy implications for things like employment, things like public assistance, or whatever. There was a whole list of things that he was concerned about regarding folks that had these convictions on their record. These aren't people that were caught. He made the distinction between people that were trafficking drugs, and he made it clear that he's very aware as a former federal prosecutor what a drug dealer was versus someone who has a substance abuse problem. And so, he was very clear that these folks essentially are convicted of things that conviction just serves the purpose of essentially making their life more difficult to get employment, like I said, housing, all of those things. And again, you can go back and watch the testimony. And quite frankly, I agree with much of what he said. But the irony is that this is a man that has his name on every single one of the very nasty bills this year. The assault weapons ban, the magazine restriction. These are bills that absolutely sandbag every single person in this state that owns a gun. And this man has the balls to get up there and testify in front of this committee and seems so compassionate in terms of how he feels for these folks that have substance abuse problems. And I do as well. But he has absolutely no compassion for anybody that owns a gun that is going to be unaware of what. And I've been saying this on my podcast since day one, and maybe it's not the most interesting topic, but this idea that set aside the whole argument about the Constitution and why we need these guns. Now, after what we saw this summer, we know why we need these guns. But that if you set that aside and say that conversation won't even be had, let's just talk solely about people that own these things and have owned these things for decades, or some people that have owned them for a matter of weeks, right? And yet he's perfectly okay charging someone with a felony possession of a magazine that holds 11, 12, 13 rounds, essentially creating a system where you have folks that are breaking the law and committing felonies because they're not complying with some sort of regulatory measure. They're not robbing a liquor store with that firearm. They're not taking that firearm and doing anything inappropriate with it other than just simply possessing something that was legal to own for decades and that they previously owned, purchased in a gun shop, and walked out lawfully. But let's extend this situation out a little bit further. He's up there at the State House advocating for folks that have drug problems and folks that have substance abuse problems that we can't treat like criminals simply because they have this addiction, right? And he doesn't, so there's compassion for that. Yet, after discussing this issue with legislators in the General Assembly that do know guns, the folks on our side are all in collective agreement that if you had to pick one class of folks in this state that are going to be disproportionately affected by these legislative initiatives, it's going to be folks from urban areas, right? Whether they lawfully own a gun or did at one point, and now they own a gun with a magazine that is not in compliance with some of these regulations, that person will get scooped up by the police and locked up or charged with that same felony that he's talking about, where it's simply just a felony conviction, but they plea bargain it away and you don't serve any jail time, so it basically serves as an obstacle to getting housing and a job. Well, you're perfectly okay doing that to folks that own guns, right? But even worse, I guess, from the standpoint of his position on social justice reforms, any criminal that gets caught with these firearms, and criminals are going to, when they make the decision to rob a liquor store or kill someone or whatever they decide to do, right, they're not going to consider whether the firearm they own is subjected to some sort of regulation that's going to give them 5 more years in prison. But setting aside some of the more drastic scenarios like that, where someone's in an armed robbery situation or, God forbid, murders someone, think about the lesser charges. Like when we'll pick drugs as an example, where you can't possess a firearm and have drugs on you at the same time, and there's charges associated with that in Section 1147. But if someone is arrested with that firearm, that's one charge. Carrying that firearm without a permit, that's another charge. Having the drugs and whatever, that's another charge. But now you're just going to add 2 and 3 more charges on there if the person has a magazine that's got a detachable floor plate, which all magazines do, right? Or it holds 13 rounds. Or that firearm, if it's a shotgun in their home, holds 6 rounds instead of 5. So now you've created another set of charges for those folks, right? And so they'll be... they'll maybe plea bargain those off, maybe they won't, but it's essentially going to be leverage, right, to get some of those other charges to stick. And so who are the folks that are going to suffer from this the most, right? The sort of poor inner city folks that have resorted to a life of crime that a lot of these social justice people think didn't get a fair shake in life. And many of them have it, admittedly, but it essentially is going to create the same exact scenario where these folks are going to be oppressed by laws that target those folks in the inner cities much more than the folks in the rural areas. Because I can tell you that if you get pulled over with a 12-round magazine in the town of Exeter, they're gonna send you on your way. Maybe they'll tell you, yeah, you shouldn't have this, right? But you're not going to get charged with that. So it's not going to be the folks from the rural areas that suffer this. It will be the folks who in droves purchased firearms this past year because they were concerned about their safety. And remember one of my podcasts a little bit earlier, and I'll end with this, where we had the Federated Sportsmen put on a new shooters class, and the overwhelming majority of folks that were in that class were folks that were of color or were female. And those folks are the ones that we don't traditionally see hanging around, loitering around gun shops, or they don't belong to a lot of the more rural clubs. They go to places like Mid-State, which is great to shoot there, but no dig against them, but they go to these places where they pay to shoot, and then that's that. they're not part of that sort of gun community, they're not going to know that the firearms that they purchase now are in violation of some sort of measure. So I'll end there. It's just a fair amount of irony there. And when you go to the General Assembly to testify, these are the types of things that you need to talk about, right? Don't talk about the Constitution. There will be plenty of people that will address that. Folks that are attorneys that understand this probably better than the average person. So that will be discussed in detail. Stick to how this will affect your life. You know, the beauty of our state, in a sense that, like, we often chuckle and say it's the I know a guy state, and I think they say that probably in all states, right, or all capital cities. But you know, our state has that advantage of kind of everyone knows everyone, and when you talk to legislators, there's always someone that you know that lives on their street, or vice versa. And so I think when you get up there and you testify and you say where you're from, what street you live on, it starts to become real for some of those legislators, and they start to understand that the things that they're pushing are going to affect the folks that live on their street or live 3 streets over, or the person that bags their groceries, right? That's the beauty. That's the sort of tactical advantage that we have, is that there's always, like, there's a very, like, what's this, Kevin Bacon, the 7 degrees of separation, or whatever that stupid thing is, right? In Rhode Island, it's like 2, right? If you say someone's name, if you know, there's always someone that knows you, or you know that guy, right? Or that gal, right? So I think about some of the emails I had sent this past week, and it was always, if I sent out a batch of emails, like I sent some out to Lincoln and Cumberland and South Kingstown, North Kingstown, every time I send a batch of emails out, by batch I mean folks that are on a list that we know live in a certain district, I might send an email to North Kingstown, let's say. So I sent one out to Cumberland, and sure enough, I got back 3 or 4 emails just from that one in a matter of minutes, where that person responded by saying, oh, I know that representative, right? And so they're like, great, I'm going to call tomorrow. And there's no better phone call you can get than from someone that you know. And so that legislator starts to realize, like, wow, this is not quite what I thought it was, that this isn't 7 or 8 people running around the state with these semi-automatic rifles, that it's the majority of them. And this happened in every single batch of emails that I sent out that were targeted towards certain districts, which we're absolutely going to use in election time, by the way. So, you know, brace yourself if they, God forbid, do pass something. In terms of the amount of information we've gotten from you folks, you've registered for text messages and emails. We're going to use that to our advantage, and we're going to partner up with other organizations like these progressives have, and we're going to go to war with these progressives that are in the General Assembly, because they don't represent the values of very many people. Deep down inside, you folks need to understand this has nothing to do with guns. It's about the willingness of some of these people to absolutely throw you under the bus and sandbag folks for political gain. And it's a handful of folks, and they're basically capitalizing on the fact that we've got COVID-19, and capitalizing on the fact that a lot of legislators just aren't that educated on guns. You are essentially your own best lobbyist, right? You understand guns, you understand how it's going to affect you, and you absolutely have the right to engage with your legislators and let them know where this legislation is going to leave you. So do not sit on the sidelines, all right? Don't be one of those folks to think, oh, we can't make a difference. We absolutely can. We have been doing this for about 10 years now, and certainly we've taken a couple of hits here and there, which we shouldn't have taken, but we've been doing it to the point where at least we're not Massachusetts and Connecticut. And if we had subscribed to that idea that there's nothing we can do, if we had done that in 2012, we would have been living under this assault weapons ban for close to 10 years now. So collectively, all of the gun organizations and the clubs and individuals out there have fought hard to make sure that we don't have these initiatives. And these are very un-American initiatives, and even folks that don't understand guns should understand that these things are not fair. And if they take our firearms predicated on this nonsense and propaganda, then really there's nothing they can't take from you. Anyway, keep your ears, eyes, whatever method, whatever sense you use, ESP, whatever it is, however you absorb information from the different organizations across the state, whether it's on social media, whether it's through text messaging, just make sure you're ready, because I'm going to say with a fair amount of confidence that the hearing's going to be very soon. We'll know probably 2 or 3 days ahead of time, and we need to be ready to go, and we need to have a big, strong showing this year. I know it's awkward based on all the things that are happening or the changes that have been made, but this is not the time to sort of sit on the sidelines and think that it's going to end up like it was last year, where things just kind of went away. So stay tuned. There'll be a podcast very soon on when those hearings will be and what we need to do exactly, and we'll put some other media out there in terms of how to navigate through the state system to make sure that you get those things done. All right, take care.